So it was just another morning at Windsor Castle. You'd expect the usual royal calm, the smooth gliding of polished shoes over marble floors, staff moving with that classic, almost invisible grace. But Princess Anne, she felt it. Something was off. Not dramatic, not in your face, just a quiet tension crawling beneath the surface like a whisper of a storm. People avoided her gaze just a little too much. Conversations paused as she entered rooms. Papers shuffled into folders with just a bit too much haste. And Anne, being the no-nonsense, sharp as a blade royal she is, picked up on every single beat of it. And what was everyone subtly sidestepping? Princess Charlotte's big day, a solo public speech she'd been rehearsing for weeks. Cameras were ready, speeches printed, smiles rehearsed. On the surface, it was a celebration. But to Anne, it reeked of something darker. She'd seen this game before, so Anne starts snooping very discreetly. She notices odd changes in the stage setup. The podium had been moved. Lighting had been slightly re-angled. It didn't scream sabotage unless you knew what to look for, and she did. These were the same dirty tricks she'd seen years ago, when Catherine was nearly publicly humiliated before Anne intervened, quietly saving the day back then, too. Now here it was all over again. Different girl, same dark script. And sweet little Charlotte, absolutely oblivious. She was buzzing with that pure, nervous excitement, proud of her little charity speech. But Anne heard the new phrasing. Awkward words that would surely trip up a child on live broadcast. It was intentional. Anne, not one to wait for permission, stormed into a staff meeting unannounced. And the silence that hit the room, ice cold. She sat there, flipping through notes, connecting dots, staff names that didn't belong, odd time changes, and briefing gaps. And then, boom, she saw it, the same aide, the very same one from the Catherine incident. That's when Anne knew this was no coincidence. This was a trap. Someone was trying to dim Charlotte's light before it ever really had the chance to shine. Someone wanted to remind the world that Charlotte didn't belong in the spotlight, not without someone else pulling the strings. Well, Anne had something to say about that. Midnight, yes, midnight, because Anne doesn't sleep. When her instincts are roaring, she made her move. She stood outside the aide's office. The palace was still, like it was holding its breath. And then she stepped in. Everything was too neat, not a single pen out of place. But what she found, it chilled her. Crossed out words in Charlotte's speech, rewritten phrases that sounded robotic and hollow, lighting designs to wash out her face. A floor plan with a too steep step that could cause a stumble. It wasn't sloppiness, it was a surgical hit. Then footsteps. The aide walked in and froze, caught red-handed. Anne picked up the sabotage speech and held it up like a weapon. "Tell me this was a mistake," she said, voice flat and low. He stammered. Useless. She walked out, papers in hand. The game had changed. Anne didn't wait. She called in two of her most trusted staffers, loyalists with no ties to the palace games. By dawn, every single member of the original event team had been replaced. Officially, a last-minute reshuffle, but we know better. Anne had cleaned house. She went full general mode, adjusted the lighting herself, measured Charlotte's steps across the stage, checked the mic. Nothing was left to chance. Then the most tender moment came. She sat down with Charlotte and gave her the original untouched speech. Charlotte smiled, not realizing how close she'd come to disaster. They rehearsed together over and over until Charlotte's voice found its strength. Anne didn't smile, she just watched. Every second, every word. When the big day came, Anne stood just behind the curtain. No fanfare, no attention, just silent strength. Charlotte stepped into the light, the crowd roared with applause, cameras flashed. And Charlotte, she nailed it. Poised, confident, glowing. But Anne didn't clap, she didn't need to. She knew the victory had been secured before the speech began. The real work had been done behind the scenes. And while everyone celebrated, Anne quietly slipped away. Back in her quarters, Anne laid out the documents. The smoking gun. She opened her old diary, the same one where she had documented what they'd done to Catherine. Now she added everything about Charlotte. Not out of anger, out of duty. She wasn't just dealing with petty sabotage anymore. This was part of a deeper game. Camilla's inner circle, those quiet whispers and careful manipulations, they were building a silent campaign. Against whom? Against Charlotte, and by extension, against Catherine. Against the very idea of a rising new generation. Anne knew the palace had become a war zone. Only this battlefield didn't use weapons. It used shame, and silence, and stage lighting. And here's where it gets real. Anne sat there, looking at the diary, her fingers resting on a line she'd once written after saving Catherine. This institution protects its image more than it protects its own. She thought of the camps forming inside those palace walls, Camilla's quiet army versus Catherine's silent resilience. In the middle, the monarchy, shaky, watching, waiting. She wanted to burn the diary, hide the truth. But then she thought of Charlotte one day, maybe reading it, discovering how close she came to disaster. Would it crush her? Would it make her doubt every success afterward? That's the heartbreak Anne couldn't bear, so she locked the diary away, not to hide it forever, just until Charlotte was ready. Anne walked the halls that night, alone, quiet, fierce. William would never know what she did, not because she didn't trust him, because she did. And she knew if William ever found out, he'd scorch the earth, and that fury would destroy more than just the guilty. It would tarnish Charlotte's victory too. So Anne carried that weight. That's always been her place, not in front of cameras, not in headlines, but in the shadows, making sure the curtains stayed up. Before bed, she wrote one final line in her diary. They will remember her smile, but I will remember why it stayed. And then she turned off the light. Some battles are fought with swords, but the ones that matter most, they're won in silence. As Anne stood by her window, watching the early morning mist curl over the royal gardens, her thoughts wandered. She didn't crave recognition. She didn't need medals or praise. What she needed, what she had always fought for, was dignity. For the women of the family who came after her. For those like Charlotte who still believed the palace was a safe place. Who believed kindness and effort were enough. Anne knew better. She had seen the undercurrents. And yet, despite it all, she still believed in honor, in quiet protection, in the hope that someday Charlotte would grow into a woman not just known for her poise, but for her power. A woman who stood tall, not because she was allowed to, but because no one could stop her. Anne whispered into the silence of her room, let her never know how close they came. Then she turned from the window and walked once again into the storm.